Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay, and today I have three guests in the studio. We have Dave, Chris and Patrick, and we're going to have a discussion, a panel discussion, and it's a bit of a new experiment and might well be part of a series. We'll see how it goes. Basically, Chris and I were having dinner with our wives a few weeks ago, and we were having, as we usually do, we had dinner, quite in-depth discussion about consciousness and about life and how everything fits together. And we've done now, probably on Conscious TV, maybe over 100, maybe even 150 interviews with people that have had some kind of awakening or enlightenment experience or realization. So we've covered that subject a lot individually in people's lives and how it's affected them. But we thought we would widen that and maybe bring in the question is, does consciousness evolve as well? So we've chosen three guests, one of which, of course, is Chris. And we'll start by, they've all had a degree of awakening, realization, let's say. And they're just going to start very briefly talking about what happened to them and where it took them and very briefly how life changed. And it's a very brief introduction by each one, and then we'll see where the discussion goes. So let's start with you, Chris, in terms of what happened for you.
Okay. Challenge to put it briefly. Well, I've been a long-term seeker. Basically, I went to India, as many people did, when I was about 21, and did a lot of meditation for basically the next 10 years, a lot of spiritual practice with different teachers. And I really did do a lot, you know, Tibetan Buddhism, Vipassana Buddhism, with Krishnamurti, with Douglas Harding. I saw everyone there was to see, basically. And I had, you know, various experiences and definitely learnt a lot about my mind. But for me, there was still sort of sense that I hadn't found something that was really, that would answer all questions. I knew it in myself in spite of everything I'd done. So for me, it came for me meeting my last and current teacher called Andrew Cohen. And it wasn't anything particular, but I'm sure it's related to all what I'd put in over those years. I'd read everything about enlightenment, meditation, consciousness. I knew what it was supposed to feel like and how it's supposed to be, but that wasn't actually my experience, you know, no matter how much I read about it and practiced. And it was strange. It was just after a conversation with him, I suddenly realized that actually everything was different. And I realized that it was like a lifelong existential anxiety had just dropped. And I realized that actually who I had always been was my natural state, that it wasn't something out there. I mean, which, of course, I'd heard. Anyone can repeat that sort of thing. Yes, there's nothing to find, it's just within you. But this was, I knew it. I knew it throughout my whole being. And there was a sense of dropping and a sense that, oh, I've come home. This is actually what I'd always been looking for. I knew it. And then I realized that meditation I'd been doing, well, that's my natural state. The consciousness, the ground of consciousness is the same as meditation. That is who I am. I can't, it's not some state to be acquired. It's, you know, it's who I had always have been. And, you know, and then you sort of realize that, well, that's actually been, I've had intimations of that all through my life at moments, but I'd never recognized it. No one had ever pointed out, saying, that's what it is, that's who you are.
So the coming home you found in your own way somehow.
Yeah, and that for me was like, from that point onward, it was like, that was a powerful experience that lasts actually for many weeks. You know, I didn't feel like doing anything. I just sit there, basically in meditation, but I wasn't doing anything. It was just abiding in the natural state of consciousness. So it's not like that has been, you know, I somehow became fully enlightened or anything like that, but from that point on, that was about 25, 26 years ago, I've known, there's something I've known. It's not like I know anything, but I know that mystery. I know before the mind that that's who I am. And it answered this fundamental thing that there was always something missing. So from that point on, I knew. And then when I'd look at the, you know, all these sort of sacred texts, I'd say, oh, that's what they were pointing to. I knew it. I know it for myself now. And that was, for me, the sort of fundamental experience. I've had many since, but that was the one that really was the one.
But one thing that people talk about sometimes on Conscious TV, it's almost like it's grace that intervenes, and you do so much work and you're trying to understand things. At the end of the day, though, something happens that is almost independent of what you've done, and then
Yeah.
something's revealed.
I think it's true, but there's also another statement that says that doing a lot of spiritual practice makes you accident prone.
Very good.
You know, because I knew, because I've seen many people, I've tried to sort of say, yes, I'm enlightened, there's nothing to do, but it's just like fooling yourself. Like, yeah, you can say, I know it, there's nowhere to find, and you often hear kids coming and saying that, and I've done the same for years, you know, sort of being annoying like that, but it is related to what, you know, because if I hadn't done that, I don't think I could have let go in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Patrick?
Well, I mean, very similar to Chris in many ways, because we're sort of the similar age and we followed a similar path. Because I also went to India when I was in my early 20s. But I think the story starts from my background. I was brought up as a strict Catholic, and I had a very good upbringing. But I always had this sense that, you know, something was wrong, or there was a sense of something was missing. And I was motivated by that, you know, to try and find. I knew there was something I hadn't found, and even at an early age, I used to, looking back, I used to meditate, but I didn't know that's what it was, or nobody had told me. So I had some intuitive sense that being very still and just being with nature, because I was brought up in the country, I used to find it just very rewarding and peaceful. And I never even told anybody about it because I didn't have any. There was nobody had introduced me to it. And
So it was like natural to you?
Yeah, I found that, and I found a lot of solace in that. But as I was growing up and I became a teenager, I really felt in a crisis, especially around 18 to 20. I was as an art student, and I didn't know where this was coming from. Like on an existential level, I felt really confused and quite disturbed, even though on the surface everything was fine. There was nothing wrong with my life or my upbringing. And I remember then, I think it got triggered. I saw Osho on
this
TV.
Is big, also known as Big One, Sri
Bhagwan
Rajneesh.
Sri at the time, yeah. And I just had just some upheaval in my, you know, sort of inside. And I knew, oh, whatever it was something like this. And that was the first time I'd encountered something outside myself that represented what I was looking for. So I got very involved in that whole journey, which is a story in itself. And then I immediately was having much bigger, you know, sort of the things you read about, experiences of you know, higher states of consciousness, and very joyful and ecstatic, because that was also part of the movement, was that kind of, those kind of experiences. So my range of experiences expanded in contrast to what I'd been experiencing earlier on in my life. So this was great. But it wasn't until actually more recently when I met my last teacher that something more subtle became obvious to me, that it was always the same person who was having these experiences. And actually, my understanding, to the degree it is, of non-duality is that it's actually a shift of identity. And that happened with my teacher. And then there's just something much more thrilling, and there's more of a revelation in that.
So how did your identity shift? Was it one event, or was it a process?
It's a sort of a combination of many, and also a lot of serious spiritual practice, serious meditation, and then also a growing understanding that was unfolding that, oh, okay, I just needed to understand what was going on, and I needed to be educated as well. It wasn't just a matter of me having particular kinds of experiences. It was also an education of the nature of this dimension of the self.
Yeah.
It's quite complex and subtle, and I think I, like many of us, I think we need to learn what it means. At least that's how I've come to understand it. And then I realized, oh, there's a shift of identity, and I don't know whether that was a moment or whether it's a combination of a moment and also just a deeper understanding.
Can you just very briefly talk about how that was experienced in yourself, that shift of identity?
It's a sort of like you realize that you sort of knew something. It's a bit as you read it, like Chris was saying, when you read it in the books, it's all very obvious. It's always been that way, but I didn't recognize it. And then I realized I'd actually recognized it, but I also, it's a sort of non-rational, you realize you knew something, but you weren't aware that you knew it. So it was already the case. And so it says, oh, it's already the case.
And how did you feel when that happened?
Oh, I feel like this fundamental sense that there was a problem isn't my reference point, and that's great. And there's more, but that's sort of like a shift in priorities.
That's great to start with. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn, Dave.
Yeah, I think it's similar and different in many ways. My trajectory and journey is very similar to Patrick's. I was a young man. I think what I had at that time, I was brought up the sense of God or the sense of religion, but I felt what was around me, the adults that were around me and my parents, they didn't really have any sort of convincing explanation about what life was about or anything that really resonated with my own experience. So I was lost and seeking, and I came across the most alive people that I came across at that time because I started exploring in the human psychology movement. I came across people that were sannyasins of Osho Rajneesh, and I felt that they were the most alive and most vibrant people I'd ever come across, and that attracted me, although I wasn't really attracted to a teacher or a teaching, and I didn't even know that I'd had spiritual experiences until something, you know, I had a huge explosion when somebody was giving me a massage that just sort of catapulted me into a kind of sea of being. And even then I didn't know that that's what it was. It just occurred to me. And I had a number of spontaneous experiences around Osho, but particularly I had an energy darshan with him that integrated all of this, and I could look back and see all of those experiences that they were spiritual experiences, and it added up. And I had a number of sort of non-dual awakenings at that time. So I think my life since that time, and just like Patrick's, a kind of accumulation of deep experiences, but also trying to understand what it means and what its relevance to life is. And I think that I grew dissatisfied with the explanations that the body of teaching around Osho did in terms of trying to make sense of life had. So I was seeking for other teachers. I went to see Barry Long. He had a very Western approach. It was very powerful. He had some very, very cogent and interesting teachings around ego. But I felt, as a teacher, not satisfied with the way he taught in terms of how he engaged with people. I didn't think it was engaged enough because he simply left you these metaphysical principles for you to apply. And so with my current teacher, Andrew Cohen, I felt he has a combination of understanding of the non-dual, a deep experience of that he can transmit and awaken you to, which has continued through my life, and then also a profoundly sensible and rational explanation of what it means to encompass that side of being in life, and what it means to embody and become and be closer to that experience of perfection that you find in the non-dual.
Was there a particular point, like with Chris and Patrick, they both talked about identity shifting? Was that something that you can connect with?
I think mostly that's occurred for me, not so much in the way for Chris and Patrick. It's mostly occurred over time of recognising, I think, that when the evolutionary teachings and the evolution of consciousness teachings starting to emerge, then all of those things came together. So the shift of identity for me has been more with becoming rather than being. So that shift, when the teachings of becoming became much more pronounced and much more explicit, it was then the shift of identity. I could identify myself with both poles of the human experience in a much more clear way than I think that I'd ever done when it was simply a being experience.
Okay. So one of the things that very much came out of our dinner, going back to explain how this programme came about, was we've had many guests on Conscious TV which we could say were from the Advaita school or whatever, and their understanding and their experience is that when you realise who you are, or you find the ground of being, you wake up, whatever the term is, then everything is consciousness and there's nothing to do. And in that, it's a tremendous relaxing. And of course, relaxing is a great thing. We're not going to say that we're not relaxing.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there's also a feeling amongst other guests we've had that's not the full story. And I think you three fit into that category. Insofar as, yes, you discover. My term is the ground of being. That's the term I connect with personally. That's the experience that I've had sometimes. The ground of being. I know that to be true. And certainly for me as well, the ground of being is almost a starting point for a great adventure. It's like you come out or you start to come out of all this neurotic conditioning we've had, which is all part of the human cycle. we learn from our parents and from our experiences, from our school, whatever. We learn to be a certain way, and then it's a process of uncovering and rediscovering that actually we're not all those things we thought we were.
Yeah.
So there is this point where you think, I'm not all that. So what am I? And then that starts to get revealed. What am I? And then there's this challenge, or adventure, a new adventure. How do I live my life?
Right.
On the ground of being unconsciousness, I realise I'm not actually a separate being as such, a separate human being. What does that mean practically in day-to-day life? And that's going to be the foundation of our initial discussion here. So, Dave, you're nodding the most eagerly. So let's kick off now. So what does that mean to you when I say that, about how do we then live our life as a human being?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things for me is to actually understand the nature of the spiritual experience. So without a clear understanding of what's revealed there, then how you apply or make it relevant to life itself can be quite clouded. So it's the conclusions that you draw about the nature of that experience, and I find in my own experience it's been the development of the understanding of what that is and what that reveals and what that means. Then it's through contemplating the nature of that I've understood more fully how to live and how to apply those principles.
But what does that mean practically?
So, for example, the most rational explanation, like I was saying, is from my current teacher, and there's 4 or 5 principles in which I apply in my life, and that's what guides me in terms of deep principles. So one of the most inspiring is clarity of intention. So in order to be a free expression of the ground of being, unless you're clear that that's the most important thing that you want to do in your life, and you put that above everything else, your ability to be free in the midst of the hurly-burly, complexity, emotional onslaught of life itself, your ability to navigate that and stay true to your deepest principles is compromised, and you easily get confused and lose a sense of purpose. So that would be one of the principles, and that's
Okay, so what you're saying is you have an understanding, you have also a realisation, and of course, as we all know, there's these temptations in the world, especially if we live in a city like London. Most people are not through anything they're doing, wanting to do that on an intentional basis, but they're trying to pull you out of your understanding, of your realisation. What you're saying is you're making a commitment to whatever happens, you come back to this is who I really am.
Yeah, exactly.
In different situations.
That's very good,
Okay. Chris? Yeah.
Maybe I could say, take it back a little bit, because like you were saying, this experience or non-experience, whatever it is, because in a certain way it's like discovering who you are is not really experience, because it's who you are. It's not experience to discover who you are. It just is who you are. But that is, it does, in a certain way, answer the most fundamental question, because as I said, there's something missing, something lacking. There's a sense that we're separate from everything, which is the sort of the dissatisfaction that so many people feel. But then, having answered that, and in the classic way that for me, I felt from being a seeker, I realised, well, no, I'm a finder. This is what I found what I'm looking for, and there's a certain sense of coming to the end and dropping that. That constant sort of churning, there's something missing, there's something missing in my life. I'm there, and that's what the people, they're saying,
so
recognise
you're saying
in the
you
books.
don't have that now?
Having found that, and that's the sort of the finding that answers all questions, and that is true. But I think sometimes it's made out to be, well, therefore you just abide in the questionless state, and you just live your life, and the world's there, but sort of way back there as a sort of not really interfering, your ego's disappeared. But actually I found, and this is what I found from many other people, it doesn't actually work like that in practice, in a life. Actually, I've found, and many others feel, that it wasn't like my interest in life. I realised that life is just some pale shadow. These roses are just some sort of colour out, out there. You're just a sort of appearance of light and form, a mind-body organism, you know, acting out your pre-allotted, role. Actually, I found it much more started to liberate my own interest in life, and I realised that current that had driven me to seek is still there, but it's not like I'm neurotically looking for something I'm missing. To me, it's much more liberated into life, into actually being more interested in, wow, it's extraordinary to be here and do here too, and I think for me, and I know many others, it's sort of sharing, well, life actually is interesting, and that urge to find out, to know more, to do things like this, to talk about this isn't coming from ego. I think distinguishing, because some people say, oh, well, this is just your mind, because if you just dwell there, those who speak do not know, the sort of Taoist thing. And it's true in its own context, it's very true, but there's a lot more to life. We're living an engaged life, and in it, I feel this means something. It means something to be here. It's an extraordinary adventure, like you're saying. And then that actually to pursue that and find out that actually impulse to find out is not coming necessarily from the ego. It's the expression of that same that same source, that same ground of being in action. It's not different, and I think that to me is the revelation of a different approach, where it's not, so you fundamentally dwell here, and that's fine if you live in a cave or in a monastery, but in our life that's not sufficient. There's more to life than just the ground. Yes, it's always the foundation, but it's not the sum of life. And I think that's just put it simply.
Yeah, and I just to continue there, because I think this question of what does the non-dual understanding mean in relationship to life is really what is a very profound question, and I think it can engage us for the rest of our lives. And one answer is that it has nothing to do with the rest of life. That's one of the answers. But the other side is that there's an understanding of what that experience means in relationship to life. I think that's what fires us up, and which we like to talk about, because it's the understanding of what it means, and in terms of spiritual language, it means you've transcended the ego, and that means you've transcended the belief in being a separate individual. And I think that has everything to do with how you relate to life, because if we then engage with life, and we engage with the things that we enjoy, and the things that excites us, and the things that compels us, and also what is the goodness of what we discover in the ground of being, or in the non-dual, that sense of perfection. What does it actually mean? How does it translate into life? And that's a really exciting question, and it's an exciting thing to engage in, because it's not like there's an immediate answer to that, but there is a direction, and this direction is what we're working on, and what we enjoy engaging in, and what we're doing today is to talk about this, because it means I can engage with you and each other in life without being a fundamental sense of separation and difference as a fundamental. And that changes the dynamic, doesn't it, considerably? Because often when we engage, or...
So explain how that works practically. So you are now engaging, your life force is being directed in a different way, and it's rather than come from separateness and me, I want, which the ultimate ego story is always going to take you.
Yeah, or you're working it out, or you're getting over it, or you're getting through it, you're getting towards a better...
So you're now coming from not a position, but you're coming from a feeling the force is coming through you, where you are moving forward as part of the whole. But how does that manifest practically, so we can get a feel for that?
Well, it manifests as a sense of optimism and positivity about life at a fundamental level. It doesn't mean that there isn't ego. Let's not pretend that it's as simple as, because as we engage, there's all kinds of forces at play, there's all kinds of conditionings, there's all kinds of habits, and there's also, there can be, if we're engaging creatively, there can be confusion and, all things to work out. But I mean that there's a sense that we're not divided. There isn't a fundamental division. And I mean, practically, it changes everything. I feel it changes my whole orientation, the way I relate to people, the way I see people, the way I think how things can go, my sense of what's possible. I mean, it's hard to pin it down to anything particular. It's a sort of a different view of how life actually is already. And I think then we see how things turn out, like when we engage and when we create. Because the opposite of that is that you might be unconsciously have all kinds of limitations already put on events or occasions that you're not even aware of, that say, well, things can't really work out or can't really be that good. It's like it sort of takes away those restrictions.
So it's changing your attitude to some extent.
Yeah, really, absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to add to that, if I may. Because I think one other thing that struck me so forcibly and that I feel so important is that realising that my own interest to find out that whatever that current in life, that with the thread that we feel, which is the deepest self. It's not some personal ambition to achieve this or that, but the actual interest in life, which I would call, is as you're saying, it comes through us. It actually comes from the source. It is it is the creative impulse. It's that which makes us alive. I'd say it is consciousness in action. That I feel in myself. And you feel it when you get passionate about it. You feel it coursing through your veins. It's like what lights up a person. And of course, we often think of that as, well, I've got, we've got your creative interest or your interest or passion. Ian's got his, Patrick's got his, and that's a conventional understanding. But in going beyond separation, as Patrick was talking about, just as when we experience the ground of being, we realise, well, it's not Chris's ground of being or Patrick's or Ian's. There's actually, we're talking about one unit. That's why it's so liberating, because we realise, well, it's my deepest nature, but it's the deepest nature. That there's only, there's a prior unity. It's always the case. It's a prior freedom. But just the same as this isn't it is my my creative interest, and it is Patrick's, and it is yours. But at a deeper level, it's one creative impulse. It's one evolutionary impulse. And then you see that the more I think you engage with that, then there can be lots of creative friction and sparks. But you're not trying to score. It's not four egos, jockeying for position and going, well, I like this, or working round each other. You realise, well, there's a different possibility for human engagement in that. I think that's, to me, what's exciting about it, because you're recognising a unity in action.
So I think what you're hinting at is that with a new understanding or a different understanding, which is mental and also experiential. You are not, when you're going about your work or whatever, you're not in competition with somebody else. You're not giving your power away to somebody else, but you're working at different levels in different ways as a team. Because in a way we are, if we say we all come from the same source, which is the realizations that you guys have had, part of it, then it is all a team. It is all oneness moving together.
And yet you've got your own expression of it. It's not like we're sort of. It's not like when people talk of like sort of walk-ins, or you're channeling something, because it's not like going, oh, this is speaking through me, and I'm a sort of expression of some alien force. It's much more of being the deepest person that you always could be. But it's expression of one thing, yet of course it's unique, authentic expression of you or Patrick or me. And so it's sort of, I think in a fascinating way, it brings together that endless philosophical question of what the one and the many mean,
So when things are not going easily, what happens then? It's these things, I'm sure there's some people out there saying, well, these guys sound great, yes, and everything's going well in their life, but what happens when your partner walks out, or your business goes bankrupt, or you find you've got some kind of really bad illness?
Well,
does it? How do you face these challenges?
I can speak to that, very directly, because my mother died this year. So she had been sort of unwell for many years, but this year she got a massive stroke, and after about 3 or 4 weeks she slipped away. So bereavement and that sort of loss is probably one of the most profound disrupting things you can have to your sort of personal values, and can shake your faith whether life is good or not. It's very challenging to your emotions. The sense of loss and the sense of grieving can sort of consume and overtake you, and it did for me. But the thing is that I fundamentally knew that I was committed to this kind of creativity, this unity consciousness, you could say, the evolution of consciousness, because I know that I was committed to that. It didn't shake any profound doubts about, didn't create any profound doubts about my conviction about what life is about and what we're trying to create together with my close friends here. Didn't shake my conviction. So I still was able to maintain a positive conviction about life itself at its deepest course, from being to becoming, is still a positive process. And bereavement and loss of my mother is still, whilst relatively distressing and upsetting, it didn't shake my profound convictions in what life is. So
what was that? Did you have to remind yourself of your intention, of your commitment, or was that automatic, that process?
Well, I think that I lost my father when I first became a student of my current teacher, and at that time I wasn't mature enough or understood enough the principles. So actually my conviction was shaken, and I went through a lot of turmoil and was very confused. But because my conviction has developed over time, and because I've seen that it's worked over time, and because now I know I'm fully behind my conviction, that it didn't really shake it in any way. I still knew that fundamental positivity was the ground of my life.
Yes.
And
so it had obviously deepened during that time.
Yeah, it had, over the 6 or 7 years between me losing them both. So, but it also says something about our fundamental character as human beings, because as human beings, because our characters are relatively undeveloped, in challenging circumstances, we tend to abandon our convictions and have a lot of self-doubt. And self-doubt about what we've realised, or truth, or what's true, because of the emotional upset. So I can say that what I'm engaged in currently is allowing me to mature in relationship to the deepest truths that I've experienced, but also the relative distress and the discomfort of really challenging events.
So how do you actually feel that maturity developing? What are the signs for you that it develops? Okay, you've got the outside practical signs that when something difficult happens, you deal with it much better. But what are you aware of?
Well, I think really, and I think this is sort of true of human character, you don't really know what's going on. You don't really find out until you're tested or challenged. So, the ways that our development is set up, at various times, sometimes that are more important than others. And I know that I've delivered in those important times. So really, my internal experience of it, whether it's good or bad, sort of becomes secondary to demonstrating commitment, intention and responsibility at important moments. So,
commitment, intention and responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk personally, either Chris or Patrick, about how you found
because I think it's a very good question. I mean, how do you deal with challenges? Because that's really the kind of things we like to really know about. I mean, I think in a simple sense, like Dave, I'm aware that a lot of challenges are really not the end of the world. So you sort of have to hang in there. But these deeper understandings of like, responsibility and commitment really do help you navigate complicated situations. And I think if I think about the most challenging thing I've ever had to go through, is this really giving up a sense of like being, right about my limitations. Like the true spiritual work and development is actually letting go of your own ego to some degree, and I think that's the most challenging thing. If I think about what's been the most challenging thing to me, is that it's really demanding. But if you trust deeply enough in those experiences, that the spiritual experience, which say everything is good and everything is one, even if it doesn't feel like that, it's true. So you can trust very deeply in a way that's maybe not immediate.
But can you always do that?
Well, I have found, yes. That up to this point so far, basically. So that's as far as I've got. So you don't know what's going to happen next. Yeah. But that's a good, that you can draw. That's why, what you do in time
So you
can draw on what you've done is also, you know.
Yeah.
So that realization of who you really are is always there. And
Yeah,
it just,
as we talk about it, I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
always, but I can see that it's a deep reference point. It's not even necessarily, I don't have to remind myself.
Yeah.
okay.
But when you look at what you've also done, if you've done the right things, you
Yeah.
realize it has its own power
Yeah.
and also it helps you go forward. And so
Okay.
that,
So when you
But
say
I think that takes, I mean, just to say a little bit on this, I mean, I think this doesn't just happen by itself. I think it takes a lot of some of the things we're saying, of following our intention, of committing, you know, of realising what's most important and actually giving ourselves to that. And that sometimes you don't feel like it, you know. Sometimes I don't feel like doing, you know, even in my best moments, what I know is true, like all of us, sometimes I'm not in touch with that at all. And I think everyone is, if they're honest. I mean, maybe if you're Ramana Maharshi, that's never the case. But for most human beings, you know, we're all fickle. You know, we're conditioned. You feel all different things. You wake up in the morning, you feel lousy. You don't feel inspired by anything. But I think, but on a deeper level, I think, first of all, you know, of having a deep conviction and realization of a ground of being, but even more so, I would say, is from having more and more experience and trust in this interest in life, this, I sort of, what I'm saying, the sort of passion for life itself, of coming to the realization and conviction that I'm not ambivalent about being here. I don't think it's maybe a joke that we're in here. I don't wonder, well, why am I here? Why was I born? You know, what's the point of all this? It's a lot of this rat race, this whole, you know, world. I think of being fully convinced, you know, beyond the mind, that being here is a really good thing, that life is fundamentally good. And I think there's a certain spiritual self-confidence in that, and a confidence, not because I know something, but a confidence in the positivity of life. I don't mean like some sort of positive thinking, like you've got to sort of remind yourself or everything's positive, but beyond that, of knowing that a lot of really bad things happen and a lot of challenges, and there's my own ego, there's everyone else's, there's terrible things go on in the world, it's true, there's a lot wrong, but I think that actual life process, and that which I feel most deeply is, you know, I'm saying positive, it's sort of, is beyond that really. You know, I think it's good with a capital G, you know, and I think that gives the sort of mettle to go through things. But as Patrick's saying, you don't know. We all don't know how we're going to do. You know, can't go ahead, well, I can face everything, because we don't know. I think that would be arrogant to sort of think that we can deal with everything. I don't know. I don't know how I'll face death or whatever challenge. I don't know how I do it. You know, and when you see the calamities some people have to face. But I think there's a trust in that we're, you know, in going ahead and taking risks, and we'll find out, you know, and hopefully mature more.
Can I just add to what Chris is saying? Because what's interesting in this is that I find when you start to see life this way, it becomes quite radically less about yourself. You feel a natural, you know, motivation to share this perspective, and not in some kind of missionary way, but it's sort of it's such good news that, and it's, you realize your own story that you've been involved in for very long is actually a very small part of the real picture, and this is something that you know, that if I can say, that motivates us is you know, it's sort of natural to want to share it because of the nature of it, because you can be very busy with your own journey for a very long time, but part of this view is well, that's just a small thing. It's important. It's not insignificant, but there's a bigger. You awaken to some. It's a bigger story going on, and you, it's kind of just what.
So where is the biggest story taking you in your life? What do you feel?
Well, it's taken me way beyond where I thought I was going to go originally when I started seeking. Because I think when I started seeking, you want to just sort of sort something out that's bothering you, and it takes you to a cliff edge. I think in many ways, often, and that's both thrilling and challenging. It makes you entertain ideas about what's possible, about yourself and also life, that are so that are not really what's going on in the world that we normally, the way we look at it, but it makes you start to really contemplate them in a serious way, to see where you stand about making them possible. because you realise
Yeah.
actually who's doing all this anyway? It's us that are creating the conditions around us. So it really challenges you in the best kind of possible way.
The thing I'm picking up from all three of you is that you really bring, you haven't used this word, but you bring intelligence into the situation.
Yeah.
Insofar as it's you have experience, you have realisation, you have awakening, and then it's a question. I think you talked about it originally, Dave. You then look and you understand what actually happened and what, and then you feel what the potential is of this situation, and this understanding that everything comes from the same source. Everything is moving somewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I guess it's also a question of refinement.
Yeah,
and your movement is
yeah.
kind of in a more refined, more intelligent, more positive way.
Well, I love the way you've put that, because actually, you asked, what are the practicalities about this? But actually, there's a delight in making those refinements and increasingly subtle discernments. So the subject of this talk is the evolution of consciousness. So actually, the more refinement and more critical discernment that you can make about situations, about life and its many complexities, actually that has the consequent effect of expanding your consciousness, not in the ground of being, but your consciousness of life itself, and encompass as much as, and include as much as possible. So, and the explorations like we're having now, and actually the more sincere and profound they are, it expands your sense of consciousness now. So my sense of consciousness now of who I am and what we're doing together has expanded from when I came in the room and sat down on this chair.
Yes.
So that is a practical application. It's just not a material, totally material and visible, evidential thing that you can quantify in scientific terms, but it actually is a material event because we're discussing it now, and our consciousnesses of ourselves and what we're engaged in here is expanding at the same time, and it's developing through those refined discernments.
Yes. Well, one of the phrases I mentioned to Chris before we had the talk, and he wasn't sure about this phrase, but I'm going to throw it in the pot, see how what emerges. So something that I read many, many years ago, which is not an original statement, but it really impacted me at the time, was about being man in the world, but not of the world.
Oh, right, yeah. That's
And
a
that very
classic Dharma phrase. Yeah.
That very much for me is about not going and living in a cave in the Himalayas, not that I'm at all attracted to that anyway, but not removing yourself, although you might do for 2 or 3 weeks or even a few months. But it's very much living in the world, but not being caught in all the dramas of the world. And there's somehow a dance, because if you get too far away from the world, you kind of bring in denial. If you get too involved, it just swamps you.
You get lost in it.
That's a constant challenge, isn't it? Do you
Yeah,
find
yeah.
that?
I mean, it's a classic phrase, that one, and there's a lot of truth in it. It's like, I'm sure you probably know this from the classic Zen way. They talk of they have the ox herding pictures, the 10 stages, and at the end, the sage is in the world, he's in the marketplace, he goes to emptiness and then, and seclusion, and then back in the marketplace, in the middle of life, getting drunk, but somehow untouched by the whole thing, not involved in it, which is a beautiful concept. But I think I'm interested in something different than that. I mentioned to you because I think often, understandably, that the direction in a spiritual path, and a lot of it is all about transcendence, which we've been talking about, finding something that's beyond, that's untouched, beyond the world, beyond the mind, beyond anything, and that's why it's so liberating, but that's not the whole picture, because there is a world here. This is real. I don't believe this is an illusion. I don't believe Dave is an illusion sitting next to me. And so I sort of feel like we need that perspective, because unless we've got liberating, know something untouched by it, we're going to be lost in our mind, because that's going to be our reference point, the separate self. But if we can more and more, the separate self sense, not be small separate self sense, the ego, me and my small world, be the reference point for everything, then I think, I think we can, what I put it to you is that I'm more interested in fully being here in the world, you know, but not from the point of view of a separate self sense of being here. Yes, I'm really here. I feel that, you know, there's been a 14 billion year evolution to get us here, to develop, to be, you know, our consciousness, to be able to reflect on things, to be able to sit in a TV studio and have these marvellous things, to be able to engage rationally, and yet not to be caught up in all the limitations of rationality, of saying that's the only mode of doing, of reality. Yes, it's important, but it's limited. So we recognise the transrational and the rational, and we recognise being here in the world. I sort of feel like, well, yes, we're here. This 14 billion year process hasn't been so that we can finally realise, oh God, actually, I was never part of this whole thing. Let's get out of here. You know, this is just some pale shadow, you know, and I think, you know, it's beautiful that I mentioned you someone, you know, famous teacher Eckhart Tolle, you know, who's obviously deeply realised, but very much in the ground of being. He says that, you know, existence is just a ripple on the surface of being, which is beautiful. That's the most perfect expression of that perspective, but it doesn't tell you about... you know, while it's totally true in that perspective, it's wonderful, you know, I really respect him, I think there's more to the picture. It's not just a ripple, it's actually as real as being. And it's not different, you know, this being in life from a different, from a different perspective, from this consciousness that we feel in action, I feel is the same thing. And I sort of feel, in a way, that's if you to put it theoretically, that's a greater non-duality, I feel, or more all-encompassing non-duality, which doesn't deny, of course, that what he's saying is totally the foundation, always has been, always will be. But there's more to it, I feel, in our day and age.
Do you feel that you all have a potential that you're working towards, or is it just that the journey is taking you somewhere and you're not sure where it's going? I know for myself, I was very much goal-driven for a long time, and I still am to some extent, to be honest. But there's that I can also see that changes over time, and it becomes less, I must do this, I must do that, and I must do it in a certain way. And I'm just wondering whether the potential is part of your process.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think it's some of that is yes, and some of it is really because of the nature of potential. You want to see how it unfolds. But I was just there's a thread I wanted to follow on from, but it's always related to this understanding of what this ground of being really is, and I think it's so important to have. Because it might sound like we have got that covered and then we're really interested in evolution. That's never the case. This is a sort of a non-dual understanding that, like Chris was saying, that includes the world in that non-duality and the unfoldment of it. And I think it's important to always have a deep respect and really serious interest in this ground as a reference point. But we also need to be able to let go of it. Because one of the things I find interesting, because I teach meditation and classes, and often as we speak about and explore, I like to explore with people their understanding of meditation. And you realize there's a lot of confusion about it, but one of the things is in meditation you're supposed to learn how to let go, like really let go completely, not just of this and that, but really let go, which is, you know, is a very profound thing, and it can take, you know, decades and even lifetimes to understand that. But I think it's equally true in life. We also need to learn to let go. And often, you know, with unconscious understandings of what meditation mean, there's a sense that the world is something you've always got to be wary of. Like you were saying, you know, you don't want to get lost in it. So there's always a, you know, and it can be quite deep even to uncover that. You know, you don't really want to get involved because the world is where you get lost, and you really find yourself in this deeper place. But I find that really learning to let go is that you don't have that attitude to life. It's really unknown. It's an open book. It's full of potential. Because there's no potential in the ground. Because there's nothing there. That's the beauty. That's why you want to go there. But when you look at life, I mean, it's all potential. So there's this larger, you could say it's like a larger meta view. But it's experiential, that it's good. So you want to know, well, so what do I do if we have potentially so much freedom and there's nothing really in the way? There's nobody saying, or there's no, you know, there's just potential. So I think there's lots of obvious things that can be, you know, immediately obvious because of our own life conditions and maybe talents we have and capabilities and things we'd like to do that you want to act on. But it's always in this backdrop of, really, it's an unfolding potential. And I think that's
so it's not fixed. You feel the potential, you feel the force of the potential.
Not fixed is exactly
but
right.
But you don't know where it's taking you.
You don't know, but you know you're going somewhere, and it's good. That's, you know that. Like you said, you said earlier on, you noticed that we're going somewhere. That's one of the deepest. That's that's what you awaken to. We're actually all going somewhere.
Yes.
And then there's a growing responsibility for that, if we dare do such a thing.
I'm going to let, we've got 3 minutes left, and David's been itching to put his...
No, because actually, you know, you could... I love the way Patrick put it, because you can actually characterise the ground of being as unmanifest potential. It's only potential, but it's not actually in form. And, you know, your own intuition or realisation that there are potentials, that actually that unmanifest potential experienced with you and with others is you realise there's just greater potentials. So rather than being like self-focused on your own worries and concerns, this shift of identity is more you're more passionate about creating and untapping and realising greater and greater potential. So your focus becomes on, well, what new structures, higher structures of integration and harmony can we create, and using your own creative potential and together with others to create more diverse and more creative expressions of the unity that you experience in the ground of being. So kind of your own creative potential and latent potential starts to be realised through these kinds of expressions and interactions like we're having now.
Okay. Chris, the last minute's for you.
Well, I think it's great having a conversation. I feel we're just getting going. It's great. But I sort of feel that what I'm interested in is, you know, which everyone's been saying here, is about that we are going somewhere. And it's a direction. It's not that we know where. It's not like there's some goal that we know. I don't know what it is. But it is towards, I sort of feel, and it's not some sort of concept out there. It's actually the nature of the creative impulse in me. You want to know more, to find out more, to become more, to, you know, get a deeper integration, deeper understanding. And it doesn't come from the separate self sense. It's the nature of life. And I think that's what we can share. And that's why I feel very positive about what I'm saying we, whoever's interested in doing this can create together. I feel that that's the potential of life. And that's what excites me.
Okay, it's a great place to finish. So, Dave, Chris, Patrick, thanks very much for coming on to Conscious TV. And I enjoyed it. It was a very stimulated discussion.
Thank you.
And maybe it's the start of something. I think it probably is. And and actually, viewers, do very much give us your response to this discussion. And maybe you'd like to join us at some point in your view of how consciousness can evolve and how that evolvement is manifesting and affecting your life. Thanks again for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.